and welcome to the Alex Demczak Leadership Podcast. I am so excited for this episode because it's something that I am passionate about. It's something that I'm really excited about. I love talking about it. And it really, the topic that we're talking about today, which is, how to quit your job, it actually was, first birthed out of doing it myself. And so we're going to get into that. But also about 5 months ago, I would say, there was a 60-year-old man who approached me and kind of knew about my story, knew what I had done, and someone that I have a lot of respect for him. And he pretty much said, and I'm at the time of this recording, I'm 30. He came up to me and he said, "Alex, I know I'm double your age, but I want to do what you've done. Like, I want to quit my corporate job and I want to pursue what I feel like I want to pursue." And I was really humbled, and it was a cool conversation we had together. And I felt very much like, wow, who am I to even share with this person? But what I realized in that moment is it doesn't even matter about your age. There are so many people out there, maybe it's you, maybe someone you know, who has they have a desire to pursue work they feel called to maybe quit their job, maybe start a side hustle. And so the reason why I want to talk about this is because if I get any question, if I had 10 questions that, people commonly ask me, a frequently asked questions section, this question is by far the top one. When people approach me and say, or reach out and say, "Man, how have you quit your job? How did you do that?" And so again, I don't have all the answers, but I do enjoy talking about this because I have this conversation with a lot of people because people ask. And so a little bit of my background, I was in corporate America for about 5 years after college. I worked for an amazing company, like a company that literally they would win awards every year for being like one of the top company cultures in America. So, I had an amazing job. I still do love the people that I worked with, I worked for. I still have relationships with them today. But in December of 2021, December 21st, to be exact, is when I walked out for the last time and I quit. And the reason I did that is at that time I had been doing my side hustle for about 4.5 years, almost 5 years. And at the beginning stages, it was kind of fun to be able to do two things, and I loved it. But at a certain point, the side hustle, which was the speaking business and Streamline books, where we help people write and publish their book, those turned into way more than just a side hustle. And so that's what led me to quitting my job. And so I think to get there, to the point where I actually quit, walked away, pursued kind of my own thing, I didn't just wake up one morning and say to my wife, "Hey, today's the day," and with no warning or anything. It's just like I'm waking up and quitting. That definitely wasn't my situation. And I think for most people, that's not super, well, I guess I would say wise, but also it's not super practical. And so I'm going to bring in this episode just a few things that I think you should think about and do if you do have a desire at some point to quit, retire, transition, because these things are what I did and they've really helped me. And now that, being an entrepreneur, being self-employed since 2021, it's been pretty amazing, and I wouldn't go back and I wouldn't trade it. And I don't plan to ever go back to corporate America. And I think these things I'm going to share will encourage you, maybe someone that you know, to help you start thinking about some of these things so you can start planning, in that way. And so a mentor, around the time that I was quitting, a mentor told me, whenever you're making a big transition in life, or you're quitting, or you're making a transition, you want to make sure that, this analogy of, if you think about, there's two boats side by side, right? And so if you're taking a step from one boat to the other boat, you want to make sure that when you make that jump or leap, when you make that move, there's not a big splash involved. And so the whole point they were making was the boats should be pretty much aligned with each other so that when you do make that jump, you're not going to splash or fall in the water, right? And so what that mentor told me is, not only are your boats closely aligned and docked together at the same dock, they're tied together, but now what's happening with your boats is that you are actually causing friction, and they're running into each other because you're becoming so busy, you're doing so many things that actually you're dropping the ball really in both areas of your career. And I really needed to hear that advice, because what I was doing without even knowing it, and maybe you're in a similar situation or you've been here before, I was using my full-time job as a crutch. And I had the side hustle, which for me was being a keynote speaker and speaking at these events. And so in my mind, I never really verbalized this, but it was like a deep-seated fear was, okay, if I quit my full-time job, then I only have one thing, which is speaking for the most part. And if I fail, like it's going to be very it'll be a very noticeable thing if I fail. Right now with a full-time job and a side hustle, it doesn't really matter. And so for me, it was that crutch that I was using to not kind of pursue what I felt ultimately called to. And so for me, it was quitting my full-time job so that I could pursue what I felt called to. And for me, that was big. It was just unbelievable. And it is now, looking back, to see all the different ways and how things come together when you make a big jump like that. But essentially, I boiled down this list to about 7 things. And it sounds like a lot, but some of them are pretty straightforward. But some of them, if you apply them, they can really, I think, change your life ultimately. And so the first one that I wrote down as I was thinking about this is, number one, the first thing you have to do to quit your job is, number one, you have to establish what you want. You have to establish what you want. And what I mean by that is, it's not wise to quit your job or to quit something and not have anything lined up, or to not have a vision for what you want to do after you quit, right? It's kind of like, I've heard people say this, at retirement age, you shouldn't retire from your job. You should be retiring to something. Like, you should be retiring to something else that you're passionate about or that you feel convictions about. And so it's the same here. It's like, if you just quit your job and are like, well, I guess I'll figure something out, I don't know how wise that is, because you just don't know what's next. And so I think having something lined up, whether it's a side hustle or something else you're passionate about, is key. And it's very similar to when, like, a co-founder or a CEO or someone who starts a company, right? They build this company, blood, sweat, and tears. They spend maybe years building it up, and then some investor or some private equity company or some other competitor of theirs comes along and says, hey, we want to buy you out, and here's all this money. And so they're kind of blinded by the money, and they say, yeah, let's do it. Let's sign it over. They essentially sign away their business, right? The thing they've worked so hard to cultivate, steward, and build. And then, they see the money hit their bank account. There's like this initial rush. And this is from me reading about this from other founders. This has never happened to me. But just from reading about it, there's this rush of like, oh my goodness, my life is different. Wow, this is so exciting. But then, like, the next day or maybe a few weeks after a few vacations, whatever, it's like, well, now I just have this money in my bank account. Like, what do I actually want to do with my life? And if you look at different stories about founders, there's actually, there's like kind of these stages they go through. And a big part of it for some of them is actually like depression and just feeling like they have they don't know what they want to do next. They don't have a vision for their life. And they had this business that took up all these hours of their time. And now it's like, well, now what do I do? And so I think for you, if you are in the boat of considering, okay, I do want to quit at some point, have you fully mapped out what you want your ideal life to look like? Because if you don't, most likely just quitting your job, even if it's a toxic job, I don't know if that's going to solve everything for you. And again, obviously our jobs don't, or what we do for careers don't solve all of our problems. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think it's important to think about what you'll be doing next and not just blindly quitting because you don't like your boss. Think through, what do you want it to look like when you don't have this job? When 8 hours a day you're not going to this job, what do you want those 8 hours or however many hours you work to look like? The second thing that you need to do to quit your job is establish a runway. And what I mean by that is, if possible, to have reserves available, save up funds, have things available to where if you let's say you quit your job. For me, it was at the end of the year. So I quit in December, and I remember that January, so a few weeks after I quit, I didn't have too many speaking engagements lined up. And so for like the first half of January, I just remember being like, wow, this is a big transition. I went from being in an office 8 hours a day to now I have all this time to work on content, which is great, but I'm not actually doing anything that's making me money right now. And I remember being at total peace about it because what my wife and I had planned accordingly so that we had money and had a runway so that we could afford to have months of down months if needed. And so I just think that's something to consider is you want this process to be a blessing and not a burden. And I think that really financially is a big part of it, because if you jump into something, or if you, I guess, jump out of your job into this entrepreneur journey, I think it's important to know your numbers, to know, okay, do we have debt? Do we have certain things in our life that maybe should be paid off before we go this route? Are there certain things in my life that I need to scale down so that I can put myself in a position to where you can be wise, take care of your family, going back to the splashing analogy, if you're in the one boat, make sure that there's this runway, there's this ability to step into the next boat without making this huge splash. And a big part of that, I believe, is establishing a side hustle, because so many people that I know that I'm friends with, they started something, they went for it originally as a side hustle, and that side hustle quickly grew into something. I mean, this is just a great example. Literally, I was at a coffee shop this morning, a very successful guy that I know, a friend, a great guy. I just had said, hey, how's that side hustle going? And he literally said, this was a few hours ago, he said, well, it's not so much of a side hustle anymore. And his whole point was, I didn't even plan to say that in this episode, but it happened today. The whole point is, when you do start something, I think you'll surprise yourself on just how it can grow when you really start giving it attention and cultivating that skill or ability. And so establish a runway, make sure that this jump for you and your family is a blessing and not a burden. The third thing that you need to make a decision of, and you need to decide, is you need to decide to take ownership of your life and your career. And I know that one seems maybe simple or kind of practical, but so many people don't do that. Think about, maybe if you're in corporate America or you work at a job. I remember from my time in corporate America, I think of specific people who, it's like every day there was something that they had to complain about. There was something that, just wasn't fair in the commission structure. There was something that needed to be fixed, or on and on and on, right? And what I realized, number one, when I eventually made the jump, when I eventually quit, it's funny how many people actually reach out to you, because they almost treat you like you're, I'm trying to think here of a good description. It's like you're an alien. Like they can't put their minds around like, whoa, why would you quit? Like, why would you quit your job? And it's like you're treated like this alien a little bit, because they're like, wow, I can't even, how do I do, well, I guess that's why we're having this episode. But when I think back to certain people who would kind of always be complaining on the job or about the job, what I realized is, those people, it's way easier to complain about your job, right, when you're still on the job, right? Like those same people that were complaining, they weren't the ones making the jump, starting their own thing or whatever. They weren't really trying to fix the problem or have a solution. They were simply just complaining, right? And so it's a whole different dynamic when you actually say, okay, I'm quitting. And because what happens is when you finally quit, all of a sudden, guess who the only person left is that can be blamed? And it's you, right? It's you. It's so same for me. It's like when I quit my job, if I fail in business or whatever, like I can't blame the government, the economy, my employer, because guess what? I'm self-employed. So I'm blaming myself. And I think just know that you need to fully take ownership of your career and everything that surrounds it in that way. An easy example to me, like one question I get all the time is, okay, well, health insurance, my company takes care of health insurance. How could I possibly leave a job with insurance? And, when I first was thinking about quitting, that held me back. We had, I think around the time I was quitting, we had a 1-year-old, and, And so just thinking about, wow, am I being wise? Am I, am I taking care of my family in the right way by quitting? Those were like all the thoughts that went through my head as a dad, as a husband, and all those things. And so what's interesting though is when I actually started to look into it, like when I actually started to do my own research of, okay, there's millions of entrepreneurs in the world. How do they have their health insurance? Because surely those millions of people aren't being unwise, right? And so I did my own research. I just started Googling. I started looking up. And again, this is different for everybody. Everyone's situation is different. But I think just learning about, for example, all the years I was in corporate America, I never even paid attention to any of the insurance or any of the things that, and again, many of them are great policies and great things, but I never even took the time to investigate. I just was like, oh, these are my benefits, I'll just go with them. Well, now being self-employed, you think about those things, and for so many people, I just think there's things like insurance or other things like that just hold them back. But the reality is, I've actually found it very liberating and freeing to do this research independently, talk with people, figure out what the best situation is for our specific family, for my family. And there's kind of like this ownership aspect to it. Like, for example, the health insurance, it's health sharing. And so there's, company out of Utah, and essentially you do this health sharing where it's just been really easy. It's really been really seamless in a lot of different ways. And so now it's like I'm almost taking more ownership of my health, of my wellness, of these things, because it's like, well, before I was just kind of blindly going along with whatever we had, but now it's like, now I actually am doing things to be even more proactively healthier. So all that to say is, make the decision, whether you stay in your job for the next 50 years or you desire to quit, take ownership, because when you start to do that, I just think it changes the way that you work, and it changes the way that you lead others and that you interact with others as well. The fourth thing to focus on when you decide to quit your job, and this is a big one, this one is hard, but you have to pick an exit date and stick to it. And for some people, like that one, you were like, okay, Alex, this is a cool podcast. Then that one came, you're like, all right, I'm not going to listen to this one. But this one is tough because it requires you to actually set a date on the calendar and say, all right, this is it. And then you actually walk away. And so I did that. For me, it was at the end of the year. I knew at the end of 2021, that was it. I made that decision in September. So I knew for a few months, hey, that's it. And when you make that decision, I didn't publicly share that with people. It was me and my wife, and that's pretty much it. And so when you make that decision, things start to change. You view things differently from a different lens, because now you're like, hey, we're actually doing this thing. And what was really helpful for us, is because I have a lot of people ask me, okay, my spouse isn't super hot on me wanting to quit my job. What's your best advice for that? And the thing I would say is, knowing my backstory, which is I did a side hustle for 4.5 years. Early on in that side hustle, I didn't just go to my wife, Erin, and say, hey, like I want to be a speaker and talk in all these hypothetical scenarios and, oh, what if I could, what I did is I actually went out, and even if I took on lower paying gigs or whatever, I would show her, hey, this is the money we made this month with my side hustle. And then compared it to my full-time job. And at the beginning, it was a very low amount, but eventually it became almost the same. And then eventually it became more in the side hustle. And so I think it was on that topic specifically, it was very easy for my wife to understand, like, well, yeah, you're passionate about this other thing and you're making money, and now even more money doing it. And so I think, and that's cool. Towards the end, whenever I was deciding, she was the one that was like, you need to go, you need to do this, you need to go for it. And you need to strike out on your own and try it. And so I think for someone that, if you're talking through things with your spouse or significant other, if it gets to a point where it is stressful, that would be my encouragement, is if you're trying to pitch this dream or idea to your spouse of what you think you want to pursue, don't just talk in hypotheticals. Don't just have emotional conversations. Like, actually show some numbers, show some facts of like, hey, here's what I'm doing to build this, or here's some numbers on how it's going. And I just think the trust that's built through doing that is huge, but also it makes it more fun for everybody, because we're in it together and it's super helpful. Number 5, let people know of your plans to quit. Now, obviously, you want to be wise about this. Every employer is different. I've heard of some employers, people that talk to me about how when they let their employer know that they want to quit, their employer shuts off their computer that day and says, hey, here's your severance, we'll see you. So that's how some employers do it. My situation at my old company was, I let them know, and I think I had 2 or 3 months to where I could just kind of still continue in my role, but I was very intentional to make my rounds at the company, again, a great company, and just, say thank you to people and really just let people know what I was doing. And so when I say let people know your plans, there's going to be a lot of people out there that want to support you. Like when they hear that you are going all in on your dream or what you feel called to, like they're going to want to support you in that endeavor. Like I had so many people, doing it as a side hustle for years. I would then go back to these people and say, hey, I'm actually quitting my job in a few months. Like, do you know of any opportunities where I could go speak to any companies or organizations? And it was pretty humbling just how many connections were like, dude, that's awesome. Yeah, let me hook you up with this guy over here. Or let me send you his info. Or, hey, we want you to have you come speak again. So it's like people want to support you when you start to share your plans. And again, there's the right way to do that. And I'll leave that up to you and what you think is wise if you are planning to quit. But I do think people in your industry, people that you're going to work with more once you quit, super important to let those people know. Let them into your thought process, your decision making. Here's one thing that I'll say, and this was very helpful for me. Around the time I was making the decision, so it would have been fall of 2021, I remember talking with 12 different people in my life. So, again, I was in sales, a full-time job, and wanted to go full-time into speaking, doing speaking engagements. And so what I did is I talked to different people who were full-time in sales. I talked to people who were full-time speakers. I talked to, obviously, my spouse. I talked with people who were very successful in the speaking profession. I talked with all kinds of people, so 12 people. And I really was honest with them. And I gave many of them my financial numbers. I gave many of them I laid it all out there for them. And I said, look, here's what I'm doing. Here's kind of my long-term vision of what I want to do and the work I want to pursue. Give me your honest answer. What do you think? And what was so unique and fun and cool about the process, and I couldn't have planned it like this, 12 out of the 12 people all encouraged me to do it. And many of them almost said the same thing. They kept saying, like, there was this phrase that I kept hearing. Let me try to remember it. It was, they said pretty much were saying, like, you will always regret not going for it. Like, you'll always look back on this moment and wish you would have done it. So, like, you need to do it. And here's the word I was looking for. They kept saying it's a no-brainer. Like, just go for it. Just try it. And so it was so confirming. So I think for you, it's like, who is in your sacred circle? Who is in your tribe of mentors? Who is the people that you look to in kind of your sphere of influence that you really respect their opinion, and maybe they know you, you trust them, you know that they love you, they care about you. They're going to give you honest advice, because the reality is some of them might say, look, man, or they might say, you're not ready for this. You need to do what you're doing, and then maybe this is a year from now. But for some of you, it's going to be like, yeah, you have what's holding you back? That's what people were telling me. They're like, what's holding you back? And I couldn't, it was the crutch of that full-time job. And so I think for some of you, it's talking with people, sharing your plans, because you do, honestly, you pick up so many helpful things when you just decide to start talking with people about it, because it's almost like this desire that you've had deep down. It's kind of like, so Streamline Books, the company that I'm a co-founder of, we help people write and publish their books. And so one thing we notice is that so many people we talk to, it's like they've been hiding this secret from the world. And they tell us, I've been dreaming about writing a book for 5, 10, 20, we've heard some crazy answers all these years. And like, I haven't really told anyone. I've told my spouse, but that's about it, or whatever. And we're just like, look, that's a bummer that you've had to hide this thing that you've wanted to pursue for all these years. Like, we have a team of literal experts and professionals, whether it's writers, editors, project managers. They will help you, and they will be around you. They will surround you as a team. And so in the same way, it's like, if you have plans to pursue your own thing or to quit your job, like, obviously you want to be wise with your employer, but find the people you can confide in and talk with about that. Get their opinion, because you'll just, I think, will be very surprised on some of the wisdom and the answers that you receive from them. Number 6, we got 2 more. Number 6, view quitting your job as a test. So one of my mentors, in one of those 12 people that I talked to during the process of deciding to quit, was someone that encouraged me to, they essentially said, Alex, when you quit your job, view it as a 12-month test. View it as a 12-month test. And they said, essentially, rather, because I guess, let me back up for a second. When I thought about quitting, and I have, at that time I was, had a 1-year-old, married, mortgage, all these things. And now we have a 5-week-old, so we have 2 kids now. But anyway, I was just thinking through, like, okay, if I quit, like, man, I might be homeless in 5 weeks and can't take care of my family or whatever. And you kind of, your mind plays these, like, this imposter syndrome, or you just listen to these lies, or you have these doubts, right? And this person really encouraged me. They said, view it as a 12-month test, because in 12 months, if you view it as a test, if you can make it 12 months, then number 1, you'll know if you love it and you enjoy it. Number 2, you'll be able to gauge, did I make money doing this? Did I, have success, whatever? Do I want to keep doing this? And number 3, at that point, if you really miss corporate America and you want to go back, then guess what? You can go right on back, and you can, maybe it's not the same employer, but maybe it is. Maybe it's a new employer. You have options. And I think when that person shared that with me, it's almost like an alarm went off, or like a ding, 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 like a jackpot, like it's something just went off in my mind where it's like, yeah, it's so true. I can always decide to pivot and change and transition. That's just part of life. And so I think when you view it that way, it kind of takes the pressure off, and you don't even have to do a year test. You could say, hey, I want to test out this side hustle for 3 months. I'm going to devote, a lot of my energy, my creative energy, to 3 months of this, whatever, learning a new language, this side hustle, fill in the blank for you. And it's like, at the end of that, if it wasn't worth your time, then guess what? You don't have to keep doing it. That's what's amazing about America and the world that we live in. So view it as a test. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. Give it a try, because I think so many, I mean, gosh, I'm not trying to over-exaggerate here at all, but truly, I just, with speaking and writing books and all this stuff, so many people will tell me, like, I want to quit my job, or, yeah, I'm working on, I want to pursue this thing. And I encourage them, I'm super happy for them, but you can just kind of tell when someone hasn't done anything to work on it. It's like all hypothetical. They just talk about it. And I know everyone's in a different life stage, so there's no judgment there. But my point is, you can sit around and plan and be stuck in the details for a long time, but until you actually decide to do it and try it, you just won't know. And so the number 7, the last thing that you need to do to quit your job, number 7, is you have to enjoy the process. Enjoy the process. There's a stat that says that as Americans, I believe we work around 90,000 hours in our lives. So it's around 1/3 of our life. And when you think about that stat, that's pretty staggering. 1/3 of your life is spent at work. To me, that's a huge shame. If at the end of your life you look back, you're 90 years old, 95, whatever, however old you live to, and you look back and you say, you know what, I had a terrible job, I hated it, and just to know that you spent, like, what, 1/3 of it sleeping, and then 1/3 of it at a job that you hated. And I don't want to answer it like that. And I know that there's no perfect job, it's not all roses and sunshine. I get that. But I do think it's worth investigating for yourself. What do I feel like my passions are? What am I good at? Where do I feel like I can serve other people in the best and highest capacity? Because when you start asking those questions, then answering them and being honest, and maybe it's literally taking an hour off and a lunch break and just, like, putting in headphones and thinking about these things. When you start to ask those questions, you get some clarity pretty quickly. And so I think enjoy the process. Like, there's a lot of, I would say when I first was getting into it, kind of like scary thoughts around, quitting or doing my own thing, or all these doubts that creep in. But truly, it's fun. Like, I didn't come around and say this in the last point, I meant to, but I plan, Lord willing, to never go back to corporate America. As good of an employer as it was, like I hope to never go back. And there's so many reasons that I could cite for that. And just to encourage you, doing work that you feel called to, kind of being your own boss. There's so many pros, cons, all these different things. But man, I would not trade it. And I would not choose to go back unless I had to provide for my family. And so I would just say, enjoy the process. We get one shot at this thing called life here on earth. And I would just encourage you to, figure out what you think you're called to and really get intentional about what do I need to do out of those 7 things. Maybe you have to go back and listen to some of them, but what out of those 7 things, what is something that I need to do to make sure that I'm in a position where if I do want to quit, I can, and I'm able to do that. And so I really am passionate about this topic because doing this has changed my life. It's changed, for me, just like the healthy boundaries between work and life. I'm not perfect at it, still getting better each day, but it's just really enhanced my life and for my family as well. So I'm passionate about it. If you ever want to talk more about it, feel free to reach out to me. Alex@alexspeaking.com is my email. Would love to connect with you. But until next time, really start thinking about this. What are different ways that you can kind of grow in this area? Maybe you're in your job for the next 50 years and you never want to quit. That's great. But maybe you're someone who's listening right now and you're like, no, like I know what I want to do. It's just a matter of me actually doing it. Start applying these things. And I'm telling you, it'll start to come together quicker than you thought possible. Go out, have a great week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.